Welcome to the official YouTube channel for the Colin Cowherd podcast. Go on, hit the subscribe button. There you go, right down there. If you want to be among the first to hear my weekly takes, NFL, college football, more, right there. So, you and I have been on this for a while, that offensive coaches, McVay moved off Goff, who got to a Super Bowl. Shanahan moved off Garoppolo, that got to a Super Bowl. Andy Reid moved off Alex Smith, who consistently could get into the playoffs. The Steelers' defensive culture are sticking with Kenny Pickett. When I see that, I think to myself, you understand Burrow, Lamar Jackson, Deshaun Watson, and really some really sharp coaches are in the division. Do you think they're sticking with Kenny Pickett, or do they just don't want to publicly hammer a local kid? Because you can't watch him and think that's going to win in the AFC. He could be the 14th to 15th best quarterback in the AFC.
One thing, I heard a lot of Russell Wilson rumors to Pittsburgh, just because with the Broncos paying almost $40 million, you can get him for $1 million. So he's relatively cheap. But the moment you sign that, Russell's not competing for a job, right? And he's better than Kenny Pickett. If that truly happens and they're not interested in these other guys and aren't actively drafting a quarterback, that's insane. One thing I've heard in the league is, for a long period of time with Kevin Colbert, who was one of the best general managers in the league, and Mike Tomlin, who's a really solid coach. I mean, has some flaws, but Mike Tomlin's better than most. I do think this transition and their new front office, I don't think they're quite viewed like the same powerhouse. Like the Ravens transition from Ozzie, who works more than any retired human you'll ever see. I thought he retired 3 years ago. You see him at the combine sitting right there. The Ravens didn't skip a beat, right? DaCosta right there. I think the Steelers, they got a lot going on, right? When it comes to the transition in front off, which is natural. Most teams don't just go smooth GM to GM or coach to coach. And I just think they're an organization to kind of keep an eye on. I wonder if it's quite as, how long can you keep this up? Let's face it, 50 years. Well, they've been pretty consistent. Like, it's bound to, maybe they'll go through a little downturn right now. But a lot of people in the NFL kind of have them a little red flagged operationally, I would say. Not necessarily Tomlin, just the new GM, just the new thoughts from the front office. He's more of an analytical guy. Had come over originally, I think, from the contract stuff. Kevin Colbert, more of an old school Rooney type scout. It's just something to peek at as we move on toward football.
Yeah, I mean, there's been, Tomlin has his defenders, and I like you. I think he, in terms of, developing players, especially defensive players, they get better. He's a good motivator. There's some Pete Carroll there where he does a good job. He's very good with young players, giving them confidence, getting them into a system, and ramping young players up very quickly to play in this league. And I don't think Pete was ever good with O-lines. I don't think Tomlin is. I don't think McDermott necessarily is, where I think Andy Reid and Shanahan and McVay, they're rebuilding those O-lines. Last year, what McVay did with the O-line of the Rams is insane. He had tackles playing guards playing tackle. It was incredible. But I look at Tomlin and I think, the standard of Pittsburgh for most of my life was like Super Bowls and AFC championships. Whenever I hear this, never had a losing season, it's so odd to me. Can you imagine McVay bragging about that? Like, I don't know. It's just like Pittsburgh's standard went down. And again, you can go look at Dave Wannstedt. Wannstedt, when he was in Miami, his 4 years there, he had a better winning percentage, I believe, than Tomlin. And he got run. So I think it's one of those things where the Rooneys are reticent to make big sweeping changes and Mike's secure. But just off the top of my head, when I think of Super Bowl teams, I haven't thought of the Steelers in 7, 8 years. I think of the Ravens immediately. I think of McVay and Shanahan immediately. I think of Andy Reid immediately. There's 4. Philadelphia's always in the mix. There's like 5 or 6 teams in the league. Baltimore's one. I just think, quarterback or not, it's like that's structurally sound. The standard in Pittsburgh, I'm not anti-Pittsburgh.
Well, it's diminished. It's not as high.
It's just like I consider them to be about like the 20th best football team. If Kenny Pickett starts, 20th best football team in the league.
Well, then factor in their division, right? The Ravens have proven with Lamar Jackson They're if as long as he's playing, even when he missed a couple years ago in Huntley, but they're going to be good with Lamar Jackson, right? They're not going away. The Bengals, who I had a pro scout. I remember Greg Papa told me this is the Super Bowl. He's been calling games for 25 years. The best game he's ever seen live, Joe Burrow this year against the 49ers. Pro scout told me it was the best game he saw on tape. Now, injuries are a question with Joe Burrow. What is not a question, if he's on the field, he's a dominant elite player. And the Bengals haven't lost. They didn't lose their defensive coordinator, so they have the same play caller, the head coach. They have the quarterback. They have this infrastructure of an offense. They have an excellent defensive coordinator. If Joe Burrow plays a full season, which it's fair to question that right now because he's been injured, they're a playoff team. So Pittsburgh benefited this year because Burrow, how many games did he play? Right? He was by middle of the season, he tore his arm and he was out. And they were still kind of competitive. But if he plays, like Pittsburgh's definitely looking up at those two. And the Browns, like I talked to Stefanski for a little. Stefanski is an impressive guy, and he's clearly a good play caller. Now they Watson's cap hit this year goes from like 19 to 60 these next 3 years, so they're going to lose a lot of the depth. So I'm not feeling as strong. They're just going to be as good, but I know the Ravens are good, and I know the Bengals dominate when they got Joe Burrow. So you just look at the Steelers; they're very dependent on some of these Minka Fitzpatricks and T.J. Watt having 30 sacks. Or else you're going to win. Eventually, you're not going to have one of those 9-8 seasons where you can pound your chest and you're going to win 5 games.
So I'm going to look up here very quickly the free agent period in the NFL. So what day does it start here? Hold on.
Well, the negotiation's the 11th and it kicks off the 13th.
So we're about 10 days from it. What do you think? So if you had to hedge a bet here, give me your 3 biggest free agent signings.
Well, I do think Kirk Cousins is going to end up in Atlanta because I think they're going to throw a lot of money at him. I mean, their owner, another guy over 80, ton of money. There's going to be some urgency on them to win. Financially, this will be one of the lowest, but I do think it's by far the biggest headlines. I do think Russell Wilson in Pittsburgh makes some sense because Russell's been humbled a lot, right? And I also think what's he going to do? Go in there with T.J. Watt and Minka Fitzpatrick and Cam Hayward and act kind of weird? Like it's not. And Mike Tomlin. So and even Sean Payton kind of forced it. Like, hey, you just either got to ship in or ship out. Now, ultimately, he was always going to ship him out. But I think that's a place that is just I think it makes some sense because, like you said, the standard. You can't roll back Kenny Pickett. There's pressure on you to win. The AFC. I mean, you got Harbaugh now. The Chargers are going to be good. The Chiefs are a dynasty. Even Miami, that's got some question marks. Like their coach is pretty good. And they can score on offense. They're going to be competitive. The Bills, the AFC is really, really hard. And then I think it'll be one of the defensive linemen. One thing it's always funny when you talk to pro scouts because I always assume how's this organization? They're pretty impressive. Like, yeah, I'm hearing some things. Right. You get that sometimes, right? We know the Rams, the Niners, the Chiefs, the Ravens, but then there are all these like the Dolphins. And one thing I heard is they got a lot of financial cap issues, right? The Fangio thing was a disaster. A lot of theories at the combine, which makes sense. Hard, and you and I have talked about this, hard place to build a culture in Miami when you have all these young guys in their 20s, beautiful women everywhere, social media. It's easy to find stuff going on. Vic Fangio had enough. No one would listen to him there. Like his track record kind of speaks for itself. He knows what he's doing. So Christian Wilkins, who's one of the better defensive tackles in the NFL, they're probably not going to franchise him because they can't afford him because of their
very
cap
good
situation. Player. You're paying very elite, and those type guys don't often. It's a second contract, hit the open market. Same thing with the defensive tackle 92 for the Ravens. I screw up his name. I'd have got coach with the Ravens he's like John Randall. So if those type players hit the market, I mean you're talking $70-80 million guaranteed, and then the NFL contracts you got to decipher them, but probably $140 million contract. So anytime defensive linemen hit, offensive linemen usually don't. The Cowboys, Tyron Smith, well, he's 35 years old. He's been injured a million times. He's got the Chiefs or someone will sign him to a 1-year deal, but his name is bigger than but the young defensive linemen who are 4 or 5 years in, they are going to get an astronomical amount of money if Chris Jones to stay. I mean, what Kansas City's going to have to pay them, like L'Jarius Sneed, who is a big-time corner. But what did the Chiefs prove? Well, we just drafted Trent McDuffie. Beach has proven he can draft DBs. So what will they do? I would imagine they're going to try to trade him to a team like the Lions, desperate for a DB. Hey, this guy can be your star DB. He's been a star for us. He's won. You know his character. You know he's smart. You give us your late first round pick. Here's this guy. You give him $60-70 million guaranteed. Like that. Those are the type, and that's what happens at the combine, all those type discussions. But look at the Chiefs. They're in position where they can keep a guy, they can trade a guy, and then you got a team like the Dolphins, one of their best players, they can't even franchise because financially it doesn't even make sense on their books. So a lot of different organizations who are, struggling. One thing I noticed, just because I know so many people with the Chiefs, it turns out I know a lot of people with the Ravens. The top 7-8 organizations are really just kind of competing with themselves.
Yep.